Hello, my name's Caroline Coram and this is the Boom Review. In this podcast, I will be talking about the transgender debate. At the Paris Olympics last week, Algerian boxer Imane Khelif was allowed to fight in the women's competition despite having high levels of testosterone. The Italian boxer Angela Carini was forced to pull out within 46 seconds of the beginning of her fight, collapsing to her knees in despair in the boxing ring. Later, she would say she had never felt a punch like it. Khelif appears to be registered as a biological female, but Khelif's hormone regulation appears to be more that of a male, along with various other male-like characteristics of build and stature. In 2023, Khelif was excluded from the 2023 IBA Women's World Boxing Championships because they tested positive for the XY male chromosome, according to the International Boxing Association. The International Olympic Committee has also said that Khelif was exhibiting signs of high testosterone. Needless to say, the constant pitching of people who walk, talk, behave, look like and have the strength of a man, regardless of their genitalia, against females who do not exhibit any male attributes has left a lot of people understandably very angry. The chromosome and hormone explanations that the organisation bodies gave might sound like a load of mumbled mumbo-jumbo to the rest of us. How can someone be externally female, at least from a genitalia point of view, and have male chromosomes and extra testosterone? It would be a fair guess to think that Khelif might have had gender reassignment surgery in order to compete as a woman, though I'm not entirely sure that Algeria is the kind of place males can access gender reassignment surgery, being a largely Sunni Muslim state. Is it possible for a person with female genitalia to be born with XY chromosomes? Can this person have a mixture of male and female features externally? Can a female have extra testosterone? And can males have variations in their sex chromosomes? Can males also have extra estrogen, and so on? If any of these and more combinations are possible, how on earth can we gauge how male or female someone is, to be able to put them into a specific sex grouping where they do not have an unfair advantage over the rest of the competitors? In this podcast and the following, I will explain how it is possible for females to have male chromosomes, for males to have female chromosomes, and what might have caused this to happen. This certainly doesn't seem a part of natural evolution. So where did the conversation about transgenderism start? Exposure to transgender issues has been fairly limited until recently. Many also, up until recently, seem to be learning a mutual acceptance of people who were simply a bit different. But the launching of transgenderism onto the international stage has, in the last decade or so, thrown everything into disarray. The transgender call has been getting louder and is now somewhat of a din, being disproportionately pushed by media, politicians and activists. So disproportionate is the noise, it warrants a much closer look. Transgenderism began as a public movement way back in 1952 with a trans woman called Virginia Prince from California, who wrote, together with peers, Transvestia magazine. From a young age, Prince was inclined to dress in female clothing. Prince was under the care of a psychiatrist called Carl Bowman, who advised Prince to enjoy the feeling of being feminine. Carl Bowman, according to Susan Stryker in the book Transgender History, headed up research on sexuality and gender at the Langley Porter Clinic starting during the Second World War. Some of his subjects were soldiers, and Bowman set to work to discover the cause of the deviations in sexual orientation and, according to Stryker, to find a cure. Some of Bowman's treatments were pretty brutal, including castration of male sex offenders and administration of hormones in an attempt to change subjects' sexual deviances. He also collaborated with Louise Lawrence, a male who started living as a female in 1942, who would recruit subjects for him to study. Stryker details Bowman's written observations of both male to female and female to male subjects as follows. Open quotes. I have records of 2 males, both of whom have asked for complete castration, including amputation of the penis, construction of an artificial vagina, and the administration of female sex hormones. I also have 2 cases of females who have requested a panhysterectomy and the amputation of their breasts, together with the giving of male sex hormones in the hope that in some way the clitoris may finally develop into a penis. Male homosexuals of this type are called queens and seem to differ markedly from the main group of homosexuals who are more nearly like the average man. Here we have an extremely interesting field for further investigation. We are therefore setting up a careful plan to study a group of these so-called queens. Close quotations. Bowman would be an expert witness in a case in 1949 on the question of surgical genital modification. Both he and Alfred Kinsey gave the opinion, open quotes, that transsexual genital modification would constitute mayhem, in brackets, the willful destruction of healthy tissue, close brackets, and would expose any surgeon who performed such an operation to possible criminal prosecution, close quotations. And we do perhaps have to wonder whether their focus was more on the avoidance of criminal prosecution than it was the avoidance of the surgery itself. But both Kinsey and Bowman were clearly against this type of surgery for whatever reason. And this set a legal precedent to legitimately refuse transsexual surgery in America. The transgender community responded by fighting tirelessly for something that they felt they were being denied, and something they felt they desperately needed. Far from being isolated to the 20th and 21st centuries, the author Stryker details a number of cases of people with transgender tendencies. There seem to be entire communities of women or men at very real odds with their gender at birth from the latter part of the 1800s. The phenomenon of transgenderism was believed to be psychiatric at first, hence the in-depth study by teams of psychiatrists. In some circles today, it is also considered to be a delusional condition, one spurred on by intense media interest, overindulgence by some groups, and vilification by others. The simple explanation given by the latter, that if a person has male genitalia, they are male, and female genitalia, they are female. Perhaps we need to scour the photographs of the naked bike ride through London that is often supported by the so-called transgender movement. You might need a pair of binoculars to spot some of the penises and to establish whether someone has breast tissue or not, and there is a good reason for that. Probably the most influential of forerunners to Bowman's work was a man called Magnus T. Hirschfeld. He was a Jewish gay man from German Pomerania who trained as a physician. He set up the Institute for Sex Studies in response to the alarming number of suicides in the gay community and became prominent in the German Weimar Republic after World War I for his studies around sex, sexuality and gender. Hirschfeld was influenced by Karl Ulrichs from Hanover, Germany, according to the Washington Post article by Simon LeVay. And Karl Ulrichs made the initial observations of a broad spectrum of gayness, where some would be very male and others' behaviour was more towards the female. It was this movement towards the female that provided the kernel for study into transsexual drive and behaviour. He divided this spectrum of male sexuality up into groups as follows, as seen in the descriptions from Karl Ulrichs' sexual orientation classification scheme. Firstly, he had a dioning, and this is comparable to the modern term heterosexual. A euning is comparable to the modern term of a homosexual or gay person. And a dioning, or a heterosexual that sexually behaves like an urning, is termed a uraniaster. And then we have a manling, a manly urning, or a manly homosexual. Then a weibling, who is an effeminate urning, or effeminate homosexual. A zwischen is someone who would be somewhat manly and somewhat effeminate and homosexual. A viralized person was an urning that sexually behaved like a dioning, so a homosexual who behaved as if they were heterosexual. A uranodioning would be a bisexual. Ulrich described the state of sexuality as a continuum along a line of infinite variations, and this concept would be picked up by Hirschfeld and developed further. In the article by the Washington Post, Hirschfeld made a clumsy attempt, however, to simplify the apparent intersex nature of some of his subjects only by aspects that he could physically see. By the end of this article, it will become apparent why that methodology is erroneous. Open quotes. Hirschfeld even speculated that some gays and lesbians were intersexed in terms of the reproductive physiology. He suggested that it would be worthwhile to examine the vaginal secretions of lesbians for the presence of spermatozoa and the urine of gay men for menstrual blood. In part, some groundless speculations were the result of Hirschfeld's failure to clearly distinguish among homosexuals, transsexuals, genital intersexes, and gonadal hermaphrodites. But another factor was Hirschfeld's need for visual proof of his theories. He could not rest his case, it seemed, until lesbian sperm were laid out for the world to behold. Close quotes. It is only in recent years that work has been done to establish whether there is a link between gender dysphoria and actual clinical features. But it seems that still the broader clinical understanding of gender dysphoria, or any dysphoria for that matter, seems to try and fix the problem by pushing the child of increasingly younger age to hormones, drugs and surgery, rather than to understand exactly what is happening within them. Some explanations given to date for the cause of gender dysphoria include exposure to too much estrogen and other hormonal causes, a catch-all which really doesn't tell us very much. Other causes include congenital adrenal hyperplasia and androgen insensitivity syndrome. Even defects in normal human bonding and child rearing are blamed, i.e. it's the parents' fault. Well, isn't everything these days? Talking therapies have been given, mental health assessments done, and gender-blocking hormones have been given. The premise being that if there is no visible difference in a child or young adult from their sex assigned at birth, then it must be something in the mind. Alternatively, that person, if they really do not feel they're in the right body, then everything must be done to push them into another body. We hear stories about parents attempting to force gender reassignment treatment on children who seem to be neither completely one sex nor the other. A futile attempt to normalise a child into a more socially acceptable version of their parents, no doubt. Perhaps we should not be attempting to normalise them either. Looking deeper into the issue from a scientific point of view, there seems to be a combination of physically significant developmental issues that are appearing with increasing frequency. These can involve everything from the inappropriate expression of sex hormones, as mentioned above, to the incorrect mixing or recombination of the parent's DNA in the early stages of embryonic development. Note, these are not genetic flaws in the parents, but a functional problem with correctly mixing the genes in the fertilized egg. To having too many or too few sex chromosomes, or having a different sex chromosome in different cell lines. In fact, the possible variations are so vast that the whole sex profile issue seems to echo Ulrich's proposal of a spectrum of sexuality, rather than people being entirely one defined sex or the other. There's a lot of material on everything I've mentioned, but I've narrowed it down to chromosomes for this particular podcast to try and keep things bearable. So let's look at the issue of extra chromosomes. A number of sex chromosomal abnormalities have been identified. To stress, these abnormalities are not genetic, These are caused by the processes of fertilization and the first cells of an embryo going wrong. Many people with chromosomal issues may be completely unaware of them. Others may exhibit very obvious external signs of a mismatch between genitalia and other physical characteristics. I'm going to talk through some of the conditions I have looked at so far, with a few details of how people are affected by them. If you are interested, you can search for photographs of people who have already been diagnosed with these conditions, and you will see that often it is almost impossible to tell what their differences are from people with normal sex chromosomes. XXY, or Klinefelter syndrome, is a condition where a male gains an extra X chromosome or an extra female chromosome. This happens in the first cells right at the beginning of fertilization. Some of the issues and traits associated with this condition can be, in boys, they might be taller than average, have longer legs, a shorter torso, and possibly broader hips. They would have an absent, delayed, or incomplete puberty, and post-puberty they would have less muscle mass, less facial hair, and body hair. They would have smaller testicles and penis in relation to their peers. They might develop breast tissue and have weak bones, so be prone to breakage. They would suffer low energy levels, neuronal developmental issues including autism and ADHD. They often experience social difficulties including shyness, sensitivity, depression, anxiety and impulsiveness, and sometimes speech delays and learning difficulties. In men with this condition, we would notice low or no sperm count, small testicles and penis, a low sex drive, taller than average height, and weak bones, of course, decreased facial and body hair similar to the young boys with the condition, less muscle, increased breast tissue, and increased belly fat. The diagnosis of this condition is thought to be 1 in 500 males, but there are a number of factors that indicate that number could be a lot higher. According to Professor Rob McLachlan from the Hudson Institute of Medical Research, open quotes, worldwide figures suggest that less than half of men with Klinefelter syndrome are ever diagnosed, close quotes. A small number of babies are diagnosed with the condition, but often men will not discover they have an extra X chromosome until they attend a fertility clinic and undergo testing because of an obvious fertility issue. A study of a large biobank of samples in the UK showed that only 23% of males of the 213 who tested positive knew that they even had Klinefelter syndrome. Other conditions in this group include XXYY, which has many of the same features as Klinefelter syndrome, but 3 features, including learning and behavioural difficulties and height, are more pronounced than in Klinefelter syndrome males. XXXY, so triple XY syndrome males may display unusual facial features, including skin folds across the inner corners of the eye or wide-set eyes, unusual hand features such as a single palm crease or incurving fifth fingers, and malformations in the elbow alongside all of the other features of Klinefelter syndrome. XYY is called Jacobs syndrome, where the child gains another Y chromosome from their father. This group may have similar features to the other groups. They may also experience asthma, seizure disorder and tremors. Asthma, seizure disorder and tremors are noted as complications, which may also be present in the other variations. XYY was also tested in the biobank sampling I mentioned before, and only 0.7% of the 149 men who tested positive for this condition actually knew that they had it. The two groups, XXY and XYY, together numbered 356 in a total sample of 207,067 males, which is approximately 1 in every 581 males. The samples were gathered from males around the UK aged between 40 and 70 years of age, and the paper was written in 2022. So this suggests that these males were affected in utero in their mother's womb between 1952 and 1982. And this is a particularly important point that I will go into a little bit more in the next session. There is no data included for males born after that date, but I suspect the numbers would increase the closer we get to 2024. In females, an extra X chromosome can be acquired, resulting in XXX or trisomy X syndrome. This is diagnosed at a rate of around 1 in 900 or 1,000 girls, but again, the real numbers are thought to be a lot higher. Features can include some language-based learning and coordination difficulties, above average height, low muscle tone and curving of the pinky fingers towards the ring finger. Around 70% are fertile, but some may have issues with menstruation and early menopause. The large majority of females with XXX syndrome are never diagnosed. So let's take a look at chromosome loss. Turner's syndrome, or properly called 45,X, is normally only found in females where they carry one sex chromosome X and are missing all or part of a second chromosome. The condition has a number of different types. Females can be short and suffer premature ovarian failure. Some conditions associated with the syndrome are thyroid autoimmunity, congenital heart issues, liver abnormalities, high blood pressure, hearing loss, and kidney anomalies. The condition, like the others mentioned above, can remain undiagnosed. Only 20% are diagnosed at birth, and this is purely down to a pronounced webbed neck, but this is not always apparent in all Turner's females. And certain researchers suggest that females of small stature should all be tested for this condition. Whilst those with the syndrome may have lost the second X chromosome, there is also the possibility that the developing fertilized egg lost instead a male Y chromosome, which may account for the loss of ovarian viability in these females. There are cases of males indeed born with the same 45,X, but it is very rare because X is of course the chromosome which conveys femaleness. Researchers of one patient found part or all of the missing Y chromosome, which is a lot shorter than the female chromosome, was still present, except it had somehow fused to one arm of chromosome pair 2. There is another condition called Swyer syndrome, where the person has the male XY chromosomes, but there is a variation in the failure of gonad development. This variation with gonadal dysgenesis, XY female type, may be the condition the boxer Emain Khalif has. Yet in many articles and commentary, there is confusion about which condition this boxer actually has. Is it differences in sexual development? Is it Swyer syndrome? Or is it some sort of hyperandrogenism that makes Emain Khalif an actual female, but with male stature and build? A researcher writes the following on the condition, open quotations, in 1955, Swyer described 2 cases of male pseudohermaphroditism in reference to 2 women with a XY karyotype presenting primary amenorrhea, which is no period, tall stature, and female external genitalia, although one of the patients had an enlarged clitoris but a normal vagina. Henceforth, such complete gonadal dysgenesis has been named Swyer syndrome. Close quotations. Again, there are many variations of this syndrome where sex identity can be ambiguous externally and or internally, or the person can have a full female set of organs. The only thing they lack are ovaries, meaning they cannot become naturally pregnant. They can gestate an embryo from a donated egg to full term if implanted artificially and supported with hormones to maintain the pregnancy. The exact incidence of Swyer syndrome type conditions is unknown, but births with visible genital anomalies occur in approximately 1 out of 4,500 births. So again, the number of people experiencing Swyer syndrome could be an awful lot higher. And apparently Swyer syndrome can be caused by genetic mutation or can be linked to the X or Y chromosome abnormalities. There is yet again another variation on all of these conditions. Mosaicism is a condition that means the person carries 2 or more different genetic sets in their bodies. This can include one normal set of genes and one abnormal set of genes, or a combination of abnormal gene sets with or without a normal set, or a combination of 2 normal sets of genes. People with mosaicism have a higher or lower percentage of abnormal cells. The higher the percentage, the more marked the features. Many chromosomal abnormalities can be mosaic conditions. In fact, in an online article by Yale Medicine, most mosaicism can occur at fertilization, affecting up to 50% of cells. It appears that we can all have some level of mosaicism, where some cells express chromosomes incorrectly and others are perfectly fine. Some people may show small variations in stature or build, hair growth patterns, or seem more effeminate as males and masculine as females, or indeed being androgynous in appearance. Some may never receive a diagnosis, as these small changes are just accepted as normal variations from person to person. Therefore, the current estimates of those affected could be found to be an awful lot higher. Even more confusing is that the mosaicism of what is normally the silent inactivated X chromosome, and we will talk about that more in the next session, increases in women with age and can increase the chances of development of cancer. In addition, the Y chromosome can be lost in males as they age. By the age of 90, according to the study by the National Cancer Institute, almost half of males have lost the Y chromosome in some of their blood cells. This is thought to make males more susceptible to certain types of cancer. For context, approximately 42.9% of all fetuses are estimated to have chromosomal abnormalities, and many do not make it to full term. The older the maternal and paternal parents get, the greater the likelihood of a chromosomal abnormality. A mother aged 39 and above has only an 11% chance of carrying a baby with no chromosomal abnormalities whatsoever, and the next session will tell you why that might be. This is a staggering level of potential for sex and other chromosome abnormalities, many of which will go undetected for life. If a mathematician is listening to this session and wants to work out the number of variables for the following, it will give us some idea of how vast this particular section of sex variation is. And of course, this is an incomplete list. So cells with one sex chromosome only, cells with 2 sex chromosomes, incorrectly expressed cells with 2 sex chromosomes, XY or XX, cells with 3 sex chromosomes, cells with 4 sex chromosomes, cells with 5 sex chromosomes, and people with 2 or more variations of the above. And briefly on sex and sexuality. Each person may feel more or less male or female depending on each very unique mix of chromosomes, the impact they have on the development either of male or female genitalia, and the degree of associated hormone signaling. These chromosomal abnormalities have been shown to play a role in sexual identity, but there is no one particular gene that can be labelled a transgender gene as much as there isn't one for gay or lesbian people. Sex and sexuality of transgender and intersex people should certainly be considered as inextricably linked in the same way we associate mothering instincts with full chromosomal females and a healthy sex drive with full chromosomal males. If these people feel different from what they can see in the mirror, then perhaps they actually are different from a chromosome perspective. But because there is such a wide variation of combinations, percentage of affected cell lines and physical features, it is impossible to tell by 2 points alone, sex chromosome testing and hormone levels, where a person is exactly on a measurable scale of maleness to femaleness. Before I move on to the next session, where I talk about how this is all happening right under our noses, there are 2 more things. Firstly, is this normal? It appears to me that the incidence of transgender and intersex conditions is much greater than it was, say, 10 years ago. I am certain that having read the small amount of research that I used for this podcast, that these states of beings are not down to psychiatric conditions. However, the effects of being incorrectly combined chromosomally, altered hormonally, structurally, and in appearance must have an impact on the inevitable crisis of identity for these people, many of whom are neither fully chromosomally female nor fully chromosomally male. Much of the drive to transition from one gender to another may be based on the need to feel comfortable internally and externally. But neither the administration of hormones, the creation of plastic surgery genitalia, nor the removal of genitalia can change the chromosomal makeup of these people. Perhaps this is why many people detransition and begin the long journey to try and accept themselves as they are, as much as they can after the irreversible deeds of unscrupulous clinicians and surgeons. Chromosomal conditions cannot be cured. And finally, can chromosomal conditions be abused? And yes, I think they clearly are being. Taking the example of the athlete, Emain Khalif, if this person does have Swyer syndrome, regardless of female genitalia, their build and the presence of XY chromosomes and testosterone all suggest that this person is strongly positioned on the spectrum of maleness to femaleness, firmly in the male camp. Perhaps a scale measuring many more factors should be introduced into sport to group athletes in a much more appropriate way. This would certainly prevent injury to those women who are suffering at the hands of the poor judgment of sporting bodies. However, there is another question there. If we start testing everyone for hormonal differences, how many more people will we find? In the next session, I will be taking the study that we have done on arsenic for the last 3 years and looking at how this might contribute to the conditions talked about in this session. And I will also be taking a look at how it might contribute to issues with fertility, miscarriage, and other gestational anomalies. Thank you for listening.